All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this webinar. Um, it's going to be a very exciting 30 minutes. I hope you all are excited. I'm planning to talk about condition surveys for your collection, which is a grant fundable project that I think is very cool. My name is Megan. I work as the Outreach Conservator at the Minnesota Historical Society. So I'm available to answer questions about collections care, taking care of your collection. I also review grants related to these topics. So this is a sort of grant that I would review. These are the main points that I'm planning to talk about today. So what is a collections condition survey? Why you would do one, what the process is like, and what the final outcome would be, what kind of consultants you would hire, and how to find them. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about applying for a grant and what that would look like. So, what is a collections condition survey? A collections condition survey is basically an item by item review of a segment of a collection. Technically, you could do a collections condition survey of like an entire collection, but it would take an extremely long time. So usually you do it by portions. The focus of a condition survey is on the physical condition. Usually it would also include storage or display conditions. For example, like what kind of mount is this on? The most typical reason to do a collection condition survey is because it would provide an estimate for treatment and housing needs. So like you would get a bunch of like, these are really urgent, they need treatment right away, or they need to be rehoused right away, and these are medium priority. And this is how long it would take to do all of the treatments for the high priority items, or all of the rehousing work for all of the high priority items. So that sort of information is really useful for planning projects and also for prioritizing like which things in your collection are going to be like most at risk of damage if you don't do anything. But there's other information that you can collect as well, such as photos, health and safety information. So a kind of condition survey that I'm hearing more and more about lately is people doing health and safety surveys of like what sort of items might be risks in the collection. So like looking for things that might have pesticides on them, or things that might be radioactive, or like any sort of thing that is a collections hazard that can be really useful to identify what those are using a condition survey. Other things could be object dimensions or analytical requirements I wrote here that could be like during the condition survey, you could note which objects need to be examined more closely using like PXRF, which is an analytical tool that you can use to identify pesticides. So like things like that. One thing that might be a bit confusing for people is what is the difference between a condition survey and a general conservation assessment and long-range plan? These are two very different things. So to try to separate them out, in a condition survey, it would involve something like looking at 100 objects in detail, something like that. A general conservation assessment is a general overview of the conditions. So it would be, you'd be talking about like 10,000 objects, and you wouldn't be looking individually at the items, but just at the broad overview of how those are being stored and cared for. And so the focus for a condition survey is what are the treatment needs for specific objects? This object needs to be dusted, versus the preventive conservation needs for a collection, which could be like, we need a new HVAC system. So it's different scale. The condition survey's final report is based on the information gathered, which is it's gathered methodically and stored in a database. Usually it could be like a spreadsheet also. And the final report of a general conservation assessment and long-range preservation plan is gathered from notes that are taken during interviews and tours. So rather than looking at a spreadsheet, you're just like looking at notes that you wrote down. So it's also a different process. And the other big important thing that separates these is that a condition survey will take many days, many hours to complete, while a general conservation assessment and long-range plan is relatively quick. Usually it will just take a conservator 1 or 2 days to gather all of the data that they need to write a long-range plan. So why would you do a collections condition survey? There are a few reasons. One reason is that you already have a general conservation assessment and long-range preservation plan, and that plan has indicated that you should do a condition survey. So sometimes that's like a clear indicator for you, like, I've done all of the other recommendations on my long-range preservation plan, so my next one is I'm going to do a condition survey based on the recommendation from this report. So easy. But the important thing to note with that is that it's important in that case that you've completed or accomplished your other preventive conservation goals, like managing humidity and light, because condition surveys are like really microscopic. They're working at such a detailed level in your collection that it's important that you've taken care of like the big problems that are affecting everything first, so that you have the time and space to focus on things. So some other reasons to do a condition survey might be that you have a discrete collection that is of high value to your organization. So maybe you have like a collection of Bob Dylan's photographs, something that's really important. You might choose to do a condition survey of that so that you know exactly what the conditions are that they're in right now, or what are the treatment needs for that collection to keep it in pristine condition, because it's really important, really valuable, something like that. Another reason to do a condition survey would be in response to an emergency. So say that you have a water leak in your storage area and a bunch of boxes get wet, then you might want to do a condition survey after you've taken care of the emergency to see what condition all of the items that were damaged are in and what the treatment needs are for those items. Another reason to do one is in preparation for an exhibition, especially if it's going to travel anywhere. Exhibitions can be kind of hard on objects, and so you want to pick objects that are in stable condition. You might want to do treatments on those objects before you put them on exhibition to make sure that they're in their best shape when they're on display or if they travel. So a condition survey is good practice to do before an exhibition and also after an exhibition. So like condition surveys are like recommended that you do them periodically. So you wouldn't just do a condition survey once, but you might do one once and then again in 10 years or something like that. And then you have two identical surveys that you can compare to see if the condition is stable or if it's gotten worse, or if it's gotten better because you've been spending so much time doing other collections care tasks. So planning a survey, I separated into 3 questions that you want to answer. So your first question is, what collection do you want to survey? And this can be a lot of different things. It could be like all of your paintings or all of your books. It could be something like that. It could also be a random selection of the overall collection. So this is like a kind of common way to approach a condition survey. If you do a random selection, then you can extrapolate to the rest of your collection. Sometimes it's a really good direction to take your condition survey in, but sometimes you can miss things. So it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I wanted to say that it could also be like a very small condition survey. It could be 3 things, 3 murals. It could also be a really big condition survey, like 1,500 archaeological finds. There's a lot of scope for different sizes and different types of collections here. Just the important thing is that it's manageable. It's a reasonable task for you to manage and to plan. So your second question is, what information do you want to gather? So traditionally, like I said, object conditions, storage conditions, those are really usually key pieces of information for a condition survey. Taking pictures, you might want to take pictures of things. You might want to identify things that might contain hazards, like maybe this seems like a good candidate for pesticide residue, so we're going to be cautious about that. And another piece of information that you might want to gather is whether the object condition has stayed stable or declined over time. And that's the kind of information that you could gather by doing 2 subsequent condition surveys over time. And the third question that I have here is, what are the decisions that you're hoping to make based on this information? So commonly, the kind of decisions that you could make after a condition survey would be how to improve storage conditions, how much funding and how much supplies, stuff like that, how much of that sort of thing you're going to need to improve the storage conditions on an item level basis. It could be prioritizing objects for conservation treatment. That's common. It could be identifying health and safety issues. You're hoping to assess whether the overall condition is stable or not, and then what are the causes of that. That could be extrapolated from a survey. Identifying funding needs, that's something that a condition survey can really help with. And again, determining which objects are stable enough to travel or to go on display, that's information that you could gather in a condition survey. So I'm going to do a little bit of a change of topic, not really. The type of consultant that you're going to hire for a collections condition survey is a conservator. Conservator is a trained professional, usually with a master's level education in conservation specifically. They have a background on the physical preservation of materials, usually with a scientific background, and they have hands-on experience treating objects, usually within a particular specialty. So common specialties for conservators are material types, as in paper, paintings, textiles, furniture, objects, etc. And this is an important piece of information for when you're planning a survey, because it's a lot easier to plan a survey of a specific material type, and then you can hire a conservator of that specialty to study it. So if you wanted to do several different types of materials, and you might need to hire several different types of conservators to do the survey. Whereas if you're only surveying furniture, then you only need a conservator who has a specialty in furniture. And another important aspect of this type of consultant is that conservation has ethical guidelines. A conservator should adhere to these ethical guidelines. Why do you need a conservator to do a condition survey? Well, conservators have this specific training to identify deterioration mechanisms of collections. It's really helpful when they're doing a survey to understand, like, what are the big risk factors here? What's causing these objects to be in the condition that they're in? And that will help them identify larger trends that they're seeing in the data. But they can also, while they're doing the condition survey, give estimates for how much treatment time would be needed to conserve these items. So if you're hoping to get that sort of information out of a condition survey, then you need to have a conservator do it, because they're the ones who know how to do a conservation treatment. And also, like I said, they follow a professional code of ethics, which is really useful when you're dealing with something that you're stewarding. So back to the process of doing a condition survey. So you have answered your 3 questions about what kind of survey you want and how large it's going to be and what information you want to find. So after you've identified that, then your next step is to find a consultant with the correct specialty. So if it is an archive and paper conservation, that's the type of conservator you're going to need. If it's your costumes, a textile conservator. Once you reach out to your conservators, explain your project idea, they will then come back to you with an estimate of the time and the cost that it would take to complete the survey. And conservators can have different approaches to surveys, which can have a big impact on what the final product will be and also how expensive it is. It could be that a conservator is going to take 10 minutes with each item and go through them really fast. It could be that the conservator wants to take 30 minutes with each item and give you a much more detailed survey. And that's partially the style of the conservator and what they've been trained to do, and it's partially what you're requesting, the kind of information that you hope to get out of the survey. So you want to reach out to a couple of different conservators so that you make sure that you're getting exactly what you need out of this project. The conservator should be able to share with you a template of their survey form so that you can see what information they're planning to collect. You could also even come up with the survey form together, probably. So once you've hired your conservator, before they start, you're going to need to set up a space for them to work. Typically, it really depends on the collection, but typically a conservator is mobile during the condition survey. They have a little cart or something, and they travel through your collection storage area looking at things in situ. That's a really easy way to approach it and something that would be pretty normal. But another direction that you could go is you could set up a table for the conservator in the storage area or in a different space and have somebody else go fetch the collections items as needed to bring them to the conservator. And that could be really useful if the items are like hidden, hard to access in storage, or really big and bulky to get to. There are different reasons why you might want to do it different ways, but you can also work with your conservator to figure out what the best approach is going to be for them. And after the survey is completed, you'll receive a report with the detailed survey data. So you will get a copy of the database, and you'll also get a summary with the recommendations that come from the survey. So I've put together a couple of examples of survey forms so you can see a little bit about what kind of conditions survey information are normally gathered. So this is an example of a really brief survey form where they're taking a very short amount of time with each object and just gathering a small quantity of data. So you can see that there is the object number, the object name, the materials, and then there are tick marks for different condition problems, such as structural damage or mold. It's very brief and does not go into detail. And then there's a little bit of a space for comments. So, and the other important thing you'll find in pretty much all condition survey forms is that there's a condition grade. So here you can see that it goes from good to unacceptable. Usually there's 4 different condition grades that they're getting sorted into, and that is how objects are prioritized for treatment or storage upgrades. Sometimes you'll see different grades for the need for treatment and the need for storage upgrade, or whatever else you're going to try to gather information on, but the purpose of that is for going back and prioritizing things. So this is one example. Here's a much more detailed example. So this is the type of survey form that it would take more than 10 minutes to fill out. You can see here that there is, in addition to the information from before, there's a spot for measurements. There's a spot for like a summary of the condition, but also for much more detailed descriptions of the condition. And instead of tick boxes, it's just a blank space for the conservator to write in information. So this is the kind of condition form that you would do for a very small collection, not for a very large collection. But the information that you're gathering is like much more detailed, which will make it easier for the conservator later to give you estimates of how much time it's going to take to treat things, because there's just a lot more information for them to look at. And here's my third example of a survey form, which is one that I created recently for surveying historic markers in the state. And I made this a tick box form. So it's kind of like the first form, but also kind of different. There's tick boxes for materials, tick boxes for the condition overview, and then again for different condition issues. And then there's a section at the end for other notes where you could write in as many comments as you wanted to be more specific about the condition. So those are just a couple of examples. There are like a million different types of survey forms, and every conservator is going to have a slightly different approach. But the next slide here is about finding a conservator. We have two really good directories for finding a conservator in Minnesota. There is the Preservation Specialists Directory, which is the one that we have at the Minnesota Historical Society. I can tell you a little bit more about it in a second, actually. And then the other one is Find a Conservator. This is the American Institute for Conservation Directory, so the professional organization of conservators. So here's a screenshot of the Preservation Specialists Directory. The directory covers all sorts of different types of preservation workers in the state, so architects, historians, all sorts of things. So you would want to look under specialties and select conservators, fine art, and object. That is where all of the conservators are listed in the directory. And then there's a bunch of conservators there of all different specialties. And so you need to click into their name to find out more information about what kind of materials they work on, what kind of projects they'll take on, and to get their contact information. And it's important to note that the Preservation Specialists Directory is not a vetted list of consultants. People sign up to be on the directory. We don't approve them, like in terms of how qualified they are to do the work. You need to vet them yourself. So talk to them, make sure that they are going to have the experience that is needed to complete your project. And here's a screenshot of Find a Conservator. This is different. It's only conservators in this directory, but it's conservators all across the country. So you'll want to search by zip code to make sure that you're looking for someone local if you want to hire someone local. And then you can also select by specialty. So this is a good way to filter down to people who only treat paper items or only treat photographs or whatever it is that you're trying to do a survey of. And I should say that the Find a Conservator database, the only people who are listed in this database are people who are professional associates or fellows of the American Institute for Conservation, which is a peer review designation. So it's not the same as a certification or anything like that, but it is a little bit more of a badge of trust than you would find on the Preservation Specialists Directory. But it also limits people who are kind of earlier on in their career wouldn't be listed in Find a Conservator. So there are pros and cons to both directories. How to choose a conservator. There's a really great resource provided by the American Institute for Conservation called the Guide to Hiring. There's a link there. I can share this presentation with you if you're interested. Just let me know. There's a list of questions that you can ask and a lot more detail on the handout itself. But these sorts of information, like what is your background, where have you trained, what other kinds of projects like this have you done, and what is your availability? These are all questions that would be helpful when you're trying to select a conservator. So a little bit more about the grants. This is a project that could be either a small grant or a large grant, and it completely depends on the project itself. If it's a small condition survey, I can see that it would come in under $10,000, and then you could apply at one of our 4 small grant deadlines a year. But if it's a bigger survey, then it's probably going to fall into the large grant category, which happens once per year. And I don't know, I can't really give you any tips on which one to expect because it really depends on the nature of the survey, the size of the survey, and the conservator who's doing the survey. So to figure out how to plan for this, you really need to reach out to some consultants and make a plan first. If you ever want to talk some more with me about a project that you have in mind and like how to plan it, you could always attend a grants open house, which we have on the first Thursday of every month. I'm pretty much always there and available to talk about your grant ideas. Some information for before you apply. There is more information about the type of grant that you're applying for here in the grants manual in Chapter 7, which is called Museum Environments and Conservation. It's on page 53. Always recommend reading the grants manual first. You want to get yourself set up on the grants portal if you're not already, figure out your application deadline, and make sure to start your application early. There are procurement requirements for consultants, which you can find in the grants manual in Appendix I. I recommend that you choose your preferred consultant and attach their letter of intent to your application, because it's likely that this is going to be a large project, and you want to make sure that you have enough funding to hire the consultant to do the project that you want. If you haven't selected a consultant yet, I don't know whether or not that the amount of funding that you're requesting is going to be enough to complete the project. You might wish to phase your project into multiple phases. If you are going to do that, they have to be phases that are like complete in scope. So like you don't want, it can't be like, I'm trying to find the right description of this. You want to do a phase that like makes sense on its own as a standalone project. And if you do that, then you can come up with multiple phases. You might want to phase it like we're going to do every part of the collection, as in like every book first, and then we're going to go back and do every painting or something like that. That could be an example of phasing a condition survey. If you're going to phase your survey like that, though, you need to include a phasing plan, which will explain how you've split up the project into phases and what the timing is going to be for all of the phases. And then, of course, the most important thing is that once you have everything filled out and all of your attachments included in your application, you need to submit it before the deadline. Hopefully, I don't need to tell you to do that. The final product for a grant like this would be a copy of the conservator's report when they're finished with the survey. I have written down some application recommendations for this project. Again, I can share the slides with you if you're interested. These are just some things to think about as you're planning your project and writing your application. You want to have like a clear understanding of what the purpose of the project is and what you're hoping to accomplish. That it should be important for you to complete the project, but it's also going to be very important when you're applying for a grant for the project. And you want to include the specific information about like what collection is going to be surveyed and what information you're trying to gather, but also what activities are going to take place during the survey. For example, if you're planning to move things back and forth from the conservator's workstation, or if volunteers are helping, you could include the work that the volunteers are doing to support the project in your project description. The even rationale is really important because, like I said, there's multiple reasons to do a condition survey, but often it's a condition survey is something that you're going to do after you've done a lot of other preventive conservation tasks for your organization. So you'll want to be clear about why the condition survey is important to happen now. And like you could talk about other things that you've been working on lately that show that this is a conservation priority for you over other types of conservation projects, like lighting projects or HVAC projects, for example. Some more information, including information about the selected consultants. It is really important that you have a consultant with the right experience so that you're actually getting information that will help you plan future projects. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on this page that I need to explicitly say or expand on. If you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me by email. So here's a list of different resources that you can look at for hiring conservators, etc. Let me know if you want a copy of any of these links. That is everything that I have to say about condition surveys. Just kidding. You can ask me questions.
It looks like Melissa would like to get a copy of the presentation if possible.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely send you one, Melissa.
I have a question, Megan.
Hi. Thank
This
you.
is Jillian. What are you working on in that picture?
In which picture?
Oh, sorry. It was a large metal object. Large, long metal object.
Oh, let me scroll backwards. I'll see if it's the one that you were thinking about. This one?
That one. Yeah.
That is a cannon that I'm working on. It's
okay. I see it now.
Yeah. It's not as exciting as it looks because it was actually a reproduction of a cannon. So it is still cool to work on a cannon, but not as cool as when you're working on a real cannon. I see Melissa's question here. Should you have a long-range plan in place before you have a specific collection survey done? And I think that the answer to that depends. I think that it's great to have a long-range plan in place anyway because they're super helpful. But if you're doing a condition survey because you're planning an exhibition or because there's been a collections emergency situation like a flood or something like that, then there's a reason to do a condition survey anyway, even if you don't have a long range plan. But if you're just like curious about the condition of a section of your collection, then I would recommend doing a long range plan first before that, because there might be other collections that have a higher priority for a condition survey.
Megan, is there advice for how to do a long-range plan?
Yeah, I have a whole different presentation about doing a long-range preservation plan that I could share with you if you are interested. It is a structured grant that we offer, so it is an easier application and an easier project to fill out, I think, than doing a condition survey because it's more of a common project that people are doing through the grants program. So I can definitely pass along more information to you if you want to send me your email address.
Thank you.
I'll put my contact information back up.
Megan, is the grants open house first Thursday of every month? Is that about any topic or is that specific to conservation?
No, it's about any topic. Usually everyone in our department is at the open house. And so if you have any kind of project in mind, there's one of us will be available to talk to you about it. I also saw a question in the chat from Celeste. Okay, sorry. What if you weren't sure where to start? Okay, if you're not sure where to start, that is a great reason to do a long-range preservation plan first, because a long-range preservation plan is going to give you a broad list of priorities for doing collections care projects, like including like environmental management and procedures and policies, but also like which segments of the collection seem like they would be most in need of a condition survey. They could help point you in that direction as well.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering because there, we got collective access and we've got some things in there now, but we've got a whole village full plus another property that hasn't, as far as I know, ever been done. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot. And it's like, okay, where do I even start going? Because I can start writing grants to get certain buildings done here, but what's the best way to do it rather than just, here, there, scattered.
Yeah, you don't really want to just jump in with a condition survey right away. It's better to start with like a broad planning strategy and then work your way through those priorities. Because even in museums that have full-time conservators that work there all the time, it's still really hard to get all of the condition surveying needs met because collections are really big and it takes a lot of time. So you really need to focus your attention on like the bigger picture items first, but then once you have the time to do a condition survey, it's like a very cool tool to use to further your conservation work in your collection.
Hey, Megan, I was just going to ask if, if a collection hasn't been inventoried yet, does that make it too early to bring a conservator in, or can they still come in to do a long range plan?
Good question. I think that you can do a long range plan before or after you have an inventory. It's going to be useful for you either way, but a condition survey you should do after you have an inventory. So an inventory is a high priority project, and a condition survey is like a really nice to have project, if that makes sense. Sorry, Melissa. What are you looking for exactly?
Sorry, I'll turn it off. I was just thinking there was a list somewhere. That's all.
A list of all the structured grants?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
In my computer.
They're definitely all
Gillian-
written down in the grants manual, which Gillian shared a link to.
Okay, thank you.
Is the grants manual online, or is that a paper publication that we can
It's
order?
online.
Okay,
We have a link to it in our website, on our website. So you can also, if you are ever having trouble finding it, you can send one of us an email and we can send you a link. If nobody else has any questions, right now anyway, we can stop the presentation, but if you need anything from me, my email is there, and I have it written down to send some of you emails with more information.